Good evening. It's nice to have you with us again tonight. I would like to just open with a prayer. Lord, be with us tonight. I know with the promise of the Paraclete that you promised to walk with us. But I need to sense that. And that takes an effort on my part and on our part to always put in the front of our awareness your presence in our life. You're there. We just need to always remind ourselves of that. And so, Lord, I ask you to remind me tonight that you are with our class and you're loving these studies. In your holy name we pray. Be with us, Lord. Amen. Well, we were on chapter 9, and if you remember, we did a little bit of chapter 9 in which Jesus met this man that had been blind since birth. And if you remember, the interesting thing that Jesus did is, with the royal official's son or a child that was dying, and Jesus healed from a distance. You know that Jesus could do anything, and we know that. But so then why did he take some of the soil and spit in it and turn it into mud and put it on the man's eyes? Didn't have to. We know that. But he did. And I believe the reason for it is that Jesus was repeating the same thing that God did when he gave life to Adam. He took Adam from the soil, and which was of the earth, and then he breathed the life of God into Adam, so that from the beginning of our time, of our creation, we have been of the earth and of God at the same time. The door's open, just walk through it. And I think that's why Jesus did this with this man. He took the soil of the earth and he put into it his saliva, which was from him, God. And so with a mixture of the earth and with God, he healed that man. And I think what a beautiful sense of unity of spirit and body that was. And by the way, I want you to know that we're on page 30 in our notes. And at the top of the page it says, chapter 9, the man born blind. And if I just review this with you just a little bit, when the Pharisees, and remember when it says the Jews, the Bible is being specific, the Pharisaical Jews, because of course not all Jews were Pharisaical and closed-minded to Jesus. Remember the statement in the Bible, and it's in Jeremiah 21, where God reminds Jeremiah of the issue with these people. They have eyes, but they do not see, and they have ears that do not hear. And the same thing is true here. They have eyes, and they know this miracle took place. And they have ears, they've heard about it, and they've talked about it. but yet their doctrine is so powerful in the making of their character that they choose their will over the truth. And that's the difference between, I think, the spirit of goodness in a person and the person where that spirit is not present. And that is, as a good person, we always, always, always need to be open to the truth. With our God and with our faith in Jesus Christ, it is so true. We have no fear of exploring the truth, because as Jesus himself says, the truth will set you free. So this is what the Pharisees were fighting. Here is a fact of a miracle of a man who was born blind, and now he had sight. And how do you explain that? Well, the truth of the issue is obvious. It's a miracle from God, but you can't accept that. And so they literally try to find ways around it, and I've listed some of them. They state, well, Jesus isn't a prophet because he healed on the Sabbath. You can work on that one. And then that the man who was born blind was lying his whole life, and he really wasn't blind. Foolishness like that. They brought in the man's parents. And the man's parents were fearful of the power, I mean the political, social power of the Pharisees. And they knew that the Pharisees had the power to throw them out of the temple. I suppose today, well, I think the Roman Catholic Church would call it an excommunication. Jehovah's Witnesses would call it a shunning. So, I mean, that's a couple examples. The Greeks used to refer to it as ostracizing. So the parents were fearful of the power of the Pharisees. And when the Pharisees put pressure on them, they said, "Are you the parents of this man?" And they said, "Yes." And they said, "Was he born blind?" And they say, "Yes." Well, then how come he can see today? And we don't know. But then they take the option to get out of the issue by saying, "Our son is an adult. He is of age. He can speak for himself. Ask him." And so that way they avoided trouble with the Pharisees. But the man wouldn't back down. He stood up for Jesus. And I mentioned last week at the end of class that if that issue ever came up to us, whatever it would be, that I would hope and pray that each and every one of us would stand up for Jesus. The discomfort of a moment is not worth damaging your relationship with Jesus Christ. And so I would always hope that we would stand up like the blind man and say the truth. And the truth was, and this is what the blind man says, which to me is so important, and I think in many ways true of every single one of us, and that is, he says, "Once I was blind, but now I see." And that's the truth. And he would not back down from that. And he made some interesting comments to the Pharisees, which for the time would have been very courageous to say. I'm going to pick it up in chapter 9, verse 28, and read through 30. And it says in 28, Then they hurled Then they hurled insults at the man and said, "You are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from." How many times do they need to go back to that argument that they don't know where Jesus came from, when in the scriptures it is so clear? And you remember we did that with the statement out of Micah that he would be born in Bethlehem, with the statement out of Hosea that he would come out of Egypt, with the statement out of Isaiah that he would come out of the Galilee, all of which were true, and true today as they were 2,000 years ago. And the blind man answered them, "Now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes." And with that, the Pharisees realized that this man was standing his ground, and so they threw him out of the temple. And you stop and you think, why did he get thrown out of the temple? Because Jesus healed his blindness. What a sad statement about human beings. And a lot of times we think, well, we're the smartest being on this planet. Well, in some ways, yes. And in some ways, we are sadly ignorant. And you must always remember, God is truth. Just like God is life, God is light, God is love, God is truth. You never need to fear any accusations, because the truth will what? The truth will set us free. So this is the position that this man states. He admits, I don't know who this man was, but I know he healed me. And then looking at verse 35 in chapter 9, it says, Jesus heard that they had thrown him out of the temple. And when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And the man answered him, "Who is he, sir? Tell me so that I may believe in him." And Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking to you." Then the man said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshipped him. And Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." Notice that judgment, we always think of the word judgment as something that is a condemnation. In the Bible, the meaning of judgment is to state the truth. So judgment can be a blessing. Judgment can give you sight. Judgment can give you eternal life. Judgment can heal. Judgment does not necessarily have to be a condemnation. And Jesus gives you that difference right here when he says, "I've come into the world so that the blind will see, and those that see will become blind." Basically, Jesus came into this world to present the issue of God, the presence of God. And it is up for us to look at the truth and believe in the truth. And one of the verses that has impressed me the most in my life is in John. It's in John 20, where Peter and John rush to the the cave the tomb of Jesus, and they find the burial clothes folded and neatly placed at the end of the bench. And Jesus is gone. And it says that they did not understand, but they did believe. Because, excuse me, there are times when our understanding will leave us. That's because we're fragile and we're temporary. But our belief will never leave us. And stand on your belief, because your belief stands on the truth.
Verse 40.
Thank you, hon. So verse 40, some of the Pharisees who were with him heard him say this, and they said, "What? Are we blind too?" And Jesus' response was, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim that you can see, your guilt remains." And Jesus makes it clear here of an old prejudice and an old false saying that if a person was born with some sort of a handicap, that they were guilty of some sin. And that was nothing but a stupid suspicion. So basically, Jesus is saying it's not physical blindness that you have to be concerned with. It is spiritual blindness. There's a statement in Jeremiah where Jeremiah looks to the world and looks to the Lord and compares them. And he looks back at the Lord and he says, "Heal me, O Lord, and I will be healed." And what a true statement that is. So, that is in Jeremiah 5. Let's look at chapter 10. And there's some really great connections that Jesus makes. You know, Jesus connects the Old Testament prophecies with himself. And he waits until it is the right time and the right place to do it. And another prophecy that had come down to Israel by David, and also had been before David out in the tabernacle, the tent tabernacle out in the wilderness of the Sinai. If you remember our discussion on that, we understood that the opening to the tabernacle, the outer part of the tabernacle, which was this very large white curtain that surrounded the tabernacle, which was like 150 feet long, and the opening in the front of it had three openings, and there was a veil over each opening. And remember, the veils were purple, blue, and red. And the purple was the royalty of Jesus Christ. And the blue was the heaven where Jesus came from. And the red was the sacrifice Jesus would make for you. And that was the way into the tabernacle grounds. It was the only way in and the only way out. And they were called the gates, even though they were a cloth wall and a cloth curtain. They were called the gates into the tabernacle. And the only way in and the only way out was through the authority of Jesus Christ, their Messiah, our Messiah. So the word gate has always had a significant meaning, and I'd like you to turn to Psalm 118, and we'll go to verse 19. And in verse 19, this is what the Psalm says. Open for me the gates of righteousness, and I will enter, and I will give thanks to the Lord. This is the gate of the Lord. And that is a prophecy saying that the Messiah is the gate of the Lord. This is the gate of the Lord, through which the righteous may enter. I will give thanks, for you have answered me. You have become my salvation, Jesus Christ. The stone the builders rejected has become a capstone. The Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. This is the day of the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. This is a prophecy of the meaning of the word gate as entering into the presence of the Lord. Now, it's interesting how Jesus phrases this prophecy. And again, let's go back to chapter 10. Let's go to verse 7. Therefore Jesus said again, I tell you the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Here he is taking the claim that the gate that is prophesied in David's Psalms is him. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and to kill and to destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. And Jesus, I'm going to go back in 10 and read the verses leading up to the prophecy that Jesus connects with on the gate. 10:1. I tell you the truth, the man who does not enter the sheep's pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. Everyone at that time would understand exactly what he's talking about, because you couldn't make it through the gate into the sheep's pen because there was a guardian there. Verse 2, the man who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The watchman opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. That's an interesting fact. Nelda and I saw that when we were in Israel. We visited the valley of Elah, which was actually the valley where David killed Goliath, and walked around out there and found riverbeds of streams that were during the rainy season, and the rocks that were in these riverbeds. And this would have been exactly the places where David would have picked his stones for his sling. And while we were there, on each side of the valley, is a rise into a small plateau. And on one side was the Philistine army backing up Goliath. There are two statements about Goliath's size, one by Samuel, 100 years, or not quite 100 years, 50 years or so after Goliath's death, and Samuel says he was 7'7". At the time of the war, in the scriptures, David says he was like 10 feet tall. So you can believe either one you want to believe in, but Goliath obviously was truly, certainly at that time when an average man would be like 5'6", maybe 5'7", that being 7 and 7 inches would make you a giant. And so Goliath was a giant of a person. And there's been some archaeological history on Goliath. There's a synagogue, the ruins of a synagogue up by the Galilee that was built after David's ascendancy to the throne. And it has on its wall, or the parts of the wall that have survived, a giant slewing men of war. So evidently the people of that time knew, believed, and understood the battle David had with Goliath, and that Goliath was a real person who really lived. So now going back to the gate.
Verse 3
and I never finished my statement in that it is true. What we saw when we were in the valley of Elah was we heard these sounds of a voice and a whistle, and this man, shepherd, came out of the rise on the on the Israeli side, the Israelite side of the war, and he came walking down, and behind him came this herd, huge herd of sheep following his voice, just like the Bible said. And he came down from the rise and into the valley, and then made a direct, sharp, right angle turn to go under a bridge. And the sheep actually, rather than a few of them, took a shortcut across the right angle, but the huge majority of the sheep went all the way down and made the right angle and followed exactly the steps of the shepherd. It was remarkable. But therefore you can see that the Bible based this on a real description of the relationship between a shepherd and his sheep. Shepherds led the sheep. They did not herd them. They didn't have to. The sheep were willing to trust and follow the shepherd that they knew.
10:3.
Say again, I'm sorry?
Chapter 10, verse 3.
Chapter 10, verse 3. So the watchman opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all of his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. And this is a direct illustration of how our heart and our soul and our spirit follow God. We follow God because we know his voice. Verse 5, but they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize the stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but they did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore, Jesus said again to them, I tell you the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and he will go out and he will find pasture. That's an example of our relationship with God, with the pasture being the place of peace and security. The thief comes only to steal and to kill and to destroy. They come that they may have life, but I have come because they may have life and have it in the full. I am the good shepherd. There's an excellent example of this in the prophecy on Bethlehem that's in Micah 5. And let's turn back to Micah, who is in the Minor Prophets, to chapter 5. And let's go to verse 4, which is the verse that takes off right after the prophecy, the prophecy of Bethlehem. And it says in verse 4 that the Messiah will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, and they will live securely, for then his greatness will reach to the ends of the earth, and he will be their peace. Let's go back to John 10.
Verse 11.
Thank you. And verse 11 again, Jesus says, I am the good shepherd, and the shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. How true that was. How magnificent that will be played out for your salvation and my salvation. The hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf will attack the flock and scatter it. The man runs because he is a hired hand and he cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. And I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. That's the relationship that a good shepherd has with his flock. And that's why Jesus connects so much with that term of the people who believe in him are part of his flock. I am the good shepherd, and I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just 15. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. How true. And then this is a beautiful verse, and I want you to put it in your heart. I have other sheep that are not the sheep of this pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd, and that's us. And I can really see Jesus standing there talking to his disciples and yet looking off into the future and seeing you and me and saying, these also are my sheep, and I will be with them and they will be with me. And that is, there's a beautiful statement in Psalm 22 at the very end. Let's go to Psalm 22, at the very end of Psalm 22. Oops, fast it. I'm to 19, I'm getting close. Psalm 22, at the very end of Psalm 22. And remember, the Psalm 22 is the one that prophesies the crucifixion of the Messiah. It's written by David. This is where where it starts off with the words, my God, why have you forsaken me? And that is exactly what Jesus will say on the cross. Because remember, I told you, God had to leave Jesus alone on the cross so that all of the evil and all of the sin of the entire world would be brave enough to attack Jesus, saying, he's alone now. Let's attack him and destroy him. And yet Jesus was so powerful on the cross with the nails in his hands and the nails in his feet. He was so powerful that he took on all of the evil and all of the sin of the past and the present of his time and of the future, our future. Took on all of sin and conquered it. And he came off the cross, the victor. And this is what the prophecy says, and I'm going to pick it up in verse 29. And it says this, all of the rich of the world will feast and worship. All who go down to the dust will kneel before him. Those who cannot keep themselves alive. Posterity will serve him. Future generations will be told about the Lord. They will proclaim his righteousness to a people yet unborn, for he has done it. They will proclaim his righteousness to a generation, a people yet unborn. Me, you. And David saw this 1,000 years before Jesus, 3,000 years before us. What a magnificent prophecy that is. Let's go back to chapter 10, verse 17. The reason my Father loves me is that I laid down my life only to take it up again. Isn't that a prophecy by Jesus, of Jesus, what Jesus will do? I will lay down my life willingly, and I'll pick it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. At these words, the Jews, Pharisaical Jews, again were divided. Many of them said, he is demon-possessed and stark raving mad. Why do you listen to him? But others said, this is not the saying of a man possessed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? There are always people who will seek out the truth. There always will be people that deny the truth and try to destroy the truth. But there are always people who will seek out the truth, even among the Pharisaical Jews. Verse 22. Then came the day of the Feast of Dedication in Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was in the temple area, walking in the Solomon's colonnade. Remember, we talked about the colonnade in the court of Gentiles on the southern side. The Jews gathered around him, saying, "How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Christ, tell us plainly." And Jesus answered, "I did tell you, but you did not believe. The miracles I do in my Father's name speak for me, but you do not believe because you are not my sheep. My sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish." It's there. It's ours. Just take it and be filled with gratitude. No one can snatch them out of my hand. That's an interesting saying. My Father who has given them to me is greater than all. No one can snatch them from my Father's hand. I and my Father are one. In Deuteronomy 32, and I'm going to go there. Upstairs. Deuteronomy 32. I think it's verse 7. I did not mark it at 39. I was off. Deuteronomy 32, but verse 39. I was off on my verses there. I apologize. And in verse 39 of Deuteronomy 32, this is the prophecy from Moses. "See now that I myself am He," that's God speaking to Moses, "there is no God beside me. I put to death and I bring to life." I want you to note the order of that. It's not life followed by death. It's death followed by life. So, I put to death and I bring to life. I have wounded and I will heal, and no one can deliver them from my hand. It's the same prophecy Moses gave in Deuteronomy that Jesus reminds us of in John 10. No one can snatch my sheep from my hand. The only thing that needs to be a warning as well as informing someone is that while no one can take us away from Jesus, Jesus does give us the will to decide to walk away from Him. That's love. That's true love. Because the only true love is love that is given in freedom. And so Jesus gives you that freedom to walk away. But no one can take you out of Jesus' hand. That is something to remember and always rely on.
Verse 31.
Thank you. Verse 31. Again, the Jews picked up stones to stone him. When are they going to figure out that's not going to work? But Jesus said to them, I have shown you many great miracles from the Father. For which of these do you stone me? And they answered, we're not stoning you for any of these, but for blasphemy, because you, a mere man, claim to be God. Now, Jesus answered them, is it not written in your law that I have said you are gods? If he called them gods, to whom the word God came, and the scriptures cannot be broken, what about the one whom the Father set apart as his very own and set into the world? Yet then do you accuse me of blasphemy, because I said I am God's son? Do not believe me because I do what my Father does, but if you do it, even though you do not believe in me, believe in the miracles, that you may learn and understand that the Father is in me and I am in the Father. I want to stop there and just remind you that Jesus is asking us that it's okay to believe in the miracles, and even through the miracles be convinced that Jesus is who he was. But the real true way to Jesus is not through what Jesus does. The real true way is through who Jesus is. Jesus is the Son of God. Yes, he performed miracles. Yes, he did things that absolutely defy the nature of man. We cannot walk on water. We cannot raise somebody from the dead. We can't even turn water into wine or heal a leper. We can't even heal a leper today. And that's very true. But the point is that I feel, and I feel this is why he was a little upset with his mother at Cana when she forced his hand into doing something about the issue of the wine. He said, Mother, this is not my time yet. It's because Jesus wanted people to understand God through him, through a belief in him, and not necessarily be convinced because he could perform miracles. The miracles are there, yes, but the true belief. Remember when Jesus says that the worshipers he sought were those who worshiped him in spirit and in truth. Doesn't say that worship him because of his miracles. So what Jesus was really seeking was a person who believed in Jesus because they knew who he was. And we want to be like him. And we want to be those sheep that follow Jesus into eternity. And I think that's what Jesus is saying there. In verse 39 it says, Then again they tried to seize him, but he escaped their grasp. And it's again the fact that until Jesus himself decides it is time to lift up my authority and allow people, evil people, to do to me what they choose to do. It wasn't until that moment that Jesus says that to himself. that he is then willing to turn himself over to the Pharisees with Caiaphas and Annas, and to the monarchy, which was Herod, and eventually to the Roman authority, which is Pilate. And it wasn't until, so Jesus, again, wasn't crucified for any other reason than he was willing to be crucified to pay the price of the Lamb of God. That has always been God's plan, since God realized that the human race was not capable of conquering sin and death. In the Garden of Eden, there was no death. God did not intend to have man die. God made man perfect. We ourselves invented sin. And we ourselves, we got a lot of help from Satan, yes. Had a lot of help from Satan in inventing sin. But we ourselves made a choice for sin, and sin leads to death. And now Jesus has turned the entire force of all creation around and let it back into life. And that's the beauty. What tree are you going to choose to stand by? The tree that led to the fruit of sin, or the tree from which the cross came? The word is literally used in Deuteronomy that the Messiah will be hung from a tree. What is a tree? Wood. What was the cross? Wood. There's a direct connection there. So choose your tree. It's a pretty easy choice. I want to just finish reading.
Verse 40.
Yeah, verse 40. Read this last paragraph in chapter 10, which says then in verse 40, "Then Jesus went back across the Jordan to the place where John had been baptizing in the earlier days. Here he stayed, and many people came to him, and they said, 'Though John never performed a miraculous sign, all that John said about this man was true.' And in that place, many believed in Jesus." And it's kind of an interesting thing that that when Jesus got away from the big cities that were under a social system of control, and it was controlled by the Roman government, it was culturally controlled by the Sanhedrin of the Pharisees. The farther Jesus got away from those centers, the more open, because the people were not so corrupted in the distorted law, that they were more open to truth. And way up north in Capernaum, they were a lot friendlier to Jesus and the message of salvation. And Jesus goes back across the Jordan River, on the eastern side of the Jordan River, and there he finds lots and lots of people that are open to his message and were willing to accept the truth. And maybe that's an interesting point. It has a lot to do with geography, but it also has to do with feelings and influences. And a lot of the time, people believe in whatever it is that influenced them. And the thing is that there's lots of things that can lead you in the opposite direction from Jesus. And that's what Jesus found in Jerusalem. Though a lot of people loved him in Jerusalem, and he spent a lot of time in Jerusalem, there was this powerful element that controlled the culture that was so against Jesus. Why? Because they were afraid of him. Pure and simple. They feared him because they saw him as someone who could take their power away from them. Jesus came to tell us that life is about power, but it is certainly not the power of control. The power of love. And Jesus found a lot more acceptance of him in places where there was a certain degree of innocence. Remember Jesus pointing to a child and saying, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven unless you really have the innocence of a child. Now, a child is not experienced and necessarily wise, but a child is innocent and will look at things from a fresh point of view. And that's all Jesus has asked, is that every one of us take up time, walk with him, and learn from him, and not learn from the world. The kingdom of heaven is very different from our world. And I believe that's why in the future, God is going to make a new world. He's going to make a new world, and the new world is going to be like Eden. It is not going to be like the world we have today. I want to thank you for being with us today, this evening. And I ask you to ponder on these things and to look past the issues of today, an election, and all these things that are going on. They're the ways of man, and maybe they have a purpose, but this I know, if you're looking for the true purpose of eternity, there's only one place to look, and that's to Jesus Christ. God bless you. Good night.